Toscani. He's a covert agent trained to survive in Vietnam. He has a master 6-degree black belt in Aikido and family in the mafia. He's a cop. Stop the car! With an attitude.
Do you know why I love you? You don't live the way other people live.
You're officially suspended, Toscani.
Feds come in, the doors close, nobody hears, smells, or sees anything.
One man.
You just made number 4 on the most wanted list.
One obsession.
I want to be number 1.
One rule.
You guys think you're above the law. You ain't above mine.
Above the law.
Hello, loyal listeners, and maybe, hopefully, a few new listeners out there. In case you didn't know, this is BAMB the Pod, B-A-M-B exclamation point. You're listening to a podcast about bad action movies. My name is Braden Wirtz, and I'm here with my brother, Brian.
Hello, and I would like to welcome loyal and new watchers. Because we've been doing YouTube now, which, you know, some people watch on there. I don't know. I haven't really gotten any feedback if people like to see us. But if you do, tell us. If you don't, you can still tell us. Or if you don't care, you can tell us that too.
Yeah. And we're always, we've talked about this, always changing things around, trying to get a little bit better audio, a little bit better video. So your picture's looking pretty sharp there too. So that's good. I think we'll have some good video from this this feed. So
yeah, we're trying to step it up as we go, learn as we go. We have no idea what we're doing. So if you know things we should do or how to do them, you can tell us that too. Or you can just be like, you're assholes and you don't know what you're doing. That's how people on YouTube talk to each other though, so it's okay.
Yeah, pretty much in social media. That's like, this is terrible. Yeah. So, but that's fine too, because we talk about terrible movies. So it's sort of fits right in. So in case you don't know which movie I should say we're talking about, well, you probably do because we usually open with a trailer, and and it's also in the title. The title.
We try
of the
to
episode.
do those things.
Yeah, but we made an announcement last episode that we're going to be doing the Steven Seagal film Above the Law. Now, this was my pick, and we'll obviously be talking about it in more depth in a minute. I kind of picked this movie just because we had not done any Steven Seagal films, and I do actually feel like all the cards on the table here. I'm not a huge Seagal fan. I don't think you really are either. We didn't really grow up watching the Seagal movies, but I felt to be charitable, I needed to actually at least pick one of the films that I thought was a better film. And I feel like this is, in his pantheon of films, one of his better films. And from what I have read on the interweb, this was one of his favorite films that he most identified with, and also a film that he was very readily involved with, because this is actually his first motion picture, which is interesting as well.
Right.
So we'll talk more about that, get into the movie. But again, if you're new to this, to watching or listening, we like to drink a lot while we talk about this because it makes it more fun.
Yeah.
So I have a drink ready. I've already started. I'm sure you do too. I have no idea what you got planned for this evening, but what are you drinking?
Well, I hate Steven Seagal. As an actor, and I don't know him personally, but I think I probably hate him as a person. Now, that being said, if he introduced himself to me someday, wanted to be on the podcast, I would say, let me think about it. I'd probably say it's fine, and maybe he'd be a very pleasant individual. But from everything I've seen, read, heard, watched of him, I think he's an asshole. And I don't mean that in the way that I call us assholes. I mean that in the way of like a real effing asshole.
Right. Now, does that relate to your drink?
It does to a bit.
Okay.
Now the other thing about Steven Seagal is he is a martial artist. If you're listening or watching, you probably know that already about him. I'm gonna do a little quiz for you because you like to do quizzes.
Okay.
I'm gonna do a quiz. But one thing I noticed when watching this movie was Steven Seagal runs like a girl.
I know. I was gonna bring this up as well. Okay, so we're on the same page on this, but go ahead.
So I'm calling this drink the fairy asshole.
Okay.
And that's no offense to any people of any sexual orientation, persuasion, or assholes. It's just limited specifically to Steven Seagal.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, what is it? What is the drink? I mean,
I decided I'm gonna make it's kind of a girly drink.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see if you're watching, I put it in like a martini glass, right?
I see that. Yes.
It's pink. So what I did is we've made alcoholic like shakes before.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I did. I had some frozen mixed berries, blueberries, raspberries, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I threw in a chunk of banana.
Okay.
I threw in a little vanilla protein powder. Because Seagal, you know, he probably used to eat protein. And I blended it with some rum and some coconut almond milk and a little bit of Campari.
Oh, there you go.
Now I'm going to have a quiz related to that in a moment. So that's my drink. It's good. It's got a little bit of alcohol in it. It's not too heavy. We're recording this kind of in the middle of the day. It's a nice kind of afternoon drink / meal. And it's, you know, the color of probably Steven Seagal's asshole.
Well, I'm glad you went with a Steven Seagal related drink. I mean, I agree with everything you had to say, and that's, like I said, why I picked this movie, because I did feel like, you know, as a film, this one's actually not that bad. Like I already mentioned, not a big Seagal fan. I have a lot to say about his assholery as well, which I think will probably be more of a discussion on the actual film itself, because this film's a pretty straightforward kind of cops and bad guys film. But since I don't really like Seagal,
straightforward in the convoluted sense.
Okay, and the '80s action, like, hey, how are we gonna put this together kind of way? But yes, I'm with you. I tried to think of, well, let's not think of what Steven Seagal would drink, because I don't really care what Steven Seagal would drink. Let's try to think of what Nico Toscani would drink, the character in the film that he's playing. Now, obviously, he's an Italian American in the film. There's sort of this sort of Italian mobster kind of like, it kind of reminded me of like a modern day version of like a like Untouchables, Elliot Ness, Al Capone type. I think that's what they're going for. I don't know that they hit the note correctly. But obviously, I've always liked the film The Untouchables. You know, with Kevin Costner, Sean Connery. So
classic.
Yeah, a little bit different feel. But I thought, well, so originally I was thinking I'm going to do like an Italian American drink, which I was going to do an Americano, because I have gin and Campari in my liquor cabinet. But I've done so many kind of like you know, Negronis and gin drinks that I just didn't want to do another gin drink this afternoon. No offense to gin drinks, I've made so many. So I thought, well, I don't feel like Nico Toscani would drink an Americano. That's too fancy for him. You know, he's kind of a lowbrow Chicago street cop. So I thought, to me, he would be like a Scotch guy, and not like a high end Scotch, just like, you know, like a blend, like a solid blend on the rocks. And I actually had a handle of White Horse Scotch, which is one of my favorite affordable blends. I'm not really a blend guy. I'm a single malt guy. I even like the Islays, which are the really smoky scotches. But if you're gonna get a good blend, or a Scotch that's a blend, you want the best one for the dollar. I mean, there's the big names like Johnny Walker and all those Glenfiddich or actually Glenfiddich is a single malt, but there's a lot of big Dewar's is a blend. But this is a little bit not so well known, at least in the United States, White Horse, but it's actually a really good blend. There's a little backstory for you. I'm going to give you a little liquor history, and then we can go into the quiz. So my favorite Scotch of all time is a Lagavulin 16. I don't know if you ever had that before. Have you had that before?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
So Lagavulin 16 is known, certainly in the Scotch world. It's an Islay single malt. It crops up in weird places. It's kind of an old man Scotch, but like in the best way.
I'm down with that.
Yeah, if you watch Parks and Recreation, it's the only thing that Ron Swanson drinks in the entire series.
Okay.
He won't drink anything else. Any bottle that he has, it's always Lagavulin 16. But also, there's another old man show. It was called Longmire, which I don't know if you ever watched. It's on Netflix. It's about
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, it's kind of an old man show. I actually liked it. But if you ever watch that show, Walt Longmire, whenever he pulls out a bottle, it's always Lagavulin 16. So, but anyways, you can go to the Lagavulin distillery on the island of Islay off Scotland, which is a small little island, but it's known for it's really having really peaty scotches. But apparently, this is what a friend told me, who's a big Scotch expert. I used to work with a couple guys who are big Scotch guys like me, and they actually kind of got me into it. But according to him, if you go to the island of Islay, you have to take a boat. You have to take like a ferry boat across the waters to get to the island. They actually give you White Horse to drink.
Interesting.
On the ferry
on
ride
the ferry?
To the boat that you take to the Lagavulin factory, because White Horse actually has Lagavulin in it. It's a blend. So Lagavulin apparently, I don't know if the White Horse is actually made by Lagavulin, but somehow they have a contract thing where part of the blend is they give them some of their scotches. So it's a really good blend, and I'm just drinking that on the rocks because I feel like that's a Chicago cop drink, Scotch on the rocks. Plus, that's just what I wanted to drink tonight. So there's a little story for you.
Well, I'm a big fan of Scotch, and generally that's my drink of choice if I'm just going with straight liquor. So yeah, that's one I'm gonna have to try because I haven't tried it. I've tried several of the other ones you mentioned, but that seems very appropriate. Now, do you have a name for it? I know it's just Scotch on the rocks.
I think it's a Tuscany. Maybe it's just a Tuscany. I'll have the usual. Give me the usual.
Just the usual.
Yeah, give me the usual.
That's perfect.
All right, Tuscany, it's coming. We'll call it the usual. How about that?
I like it.
All right.
So, are you ready? Are you ready for the quiz?
I don't know. Maybe I am. It's a pop quiz.
I mean,
we'll find out.
Do you want to do a quiz?
Oh, I want to do. I've never been quizzed. I'm always the quizzer.
I think I've quizzed you maybe once.
You know what? I think you did on Dolph Lundgren. I think you gave me a Dolph Lundgren quiz and maybe Rocky 4 or no, I don't remember. I don't remember.
So, here's a few things. Now, these were things that I suspected may be true or not true. You may know the answers to all of these, but I'm curious. I'm curious to see if you do. And I imagine people who are watching or listening will find some of these things interesting if everything that if my facts are correct.
Okay.
From the internet, so you know it must be true.
Exactly.
Right? So, true or false, Steven Seagal is part Italian.
I think he is part Jewish, part Italian, maybe something else too. Slavic or something? I don't know. I'm going to say true.
So you're going with true?
Okay. Yep, true.
Not Italian at all.
Okay.
Apparently, he has claimed at times that he was half Italian, but he is Jewish, like you mentioned, and Russian and Irish.
Slavic. So I had the Jewish and Slavic, right? I didn't know what the third thing was.
Right.
Okay.
Now, could he have some Italian descent? Maybe. I mean, sure, it's possible, but he definitely has a penchant for Italian characters and often plays Italian characters in his movies.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm wondering if that's just a marketing gimmick because Italian are often associated with mobsters and things. So I wonder if it kind of gave him a foothold. I know that as a sidebar to that, like Burt Reynolds, to take it back to Gator and White Lightning, he claimed to be part Native American. And in fact, even in early Western films, one of my favorite Westerns, 100 Rifles, which is a great film we should do sometimes, he plays a half Native American character in that. Although it seems like that also was suspicious. I think Burt Reynolds was part Jewish as well, and some other races, but probably not actually Native American. Total sidebar, but whatever.
Okay, you ready for the next question?
I'm ready.
Despite his actual, ethnicity or family origins, let's say, true or false, Steven Seagal has been tied to the Italian mafia.
I'm going to say true, because he's up to something, that guy. So I'm going to say true.
So it is true.
Okay. Good.
And this is known for a fact because he actually, back in, I want to say it was 2002, was involved in a court case where the mob was extorting him.
I think I did hear about this.
Okay.
Vaguely.
So he had a business partner for many years who was an actual New York Italian man with Italian mob relatives and associates who was his production partner. The man himself was actually, I believe, a pharmacist and owned a pharmaceutical company.
Wow.
But they invested in Seagal's films to the point that they were best friends. They actually they bought houses next door to each other. And apparently they dressed alike most of the time in all black. And Seagal's character, let's say, the character Steven Seagal may have been something that the two of them sort of came up with together.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, that's
now,
good.
whether or not he was actually involved with the mob or was the victim of the mob, who's to say?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
You ready for another question?
I'm ready. These are good.
All right. Steven Seagal did or maybe still does have a dojo in Japan.
That's true.
That is true. Yeah. In fact, his first of his 4 wives he's had was Japanese. He had a dojo in Japan. He actually does speak fluent Japanese, to the point where the Japanese people don't even make fun of him for his Japanese because it's apparently very good, very proper.
Yeah, my understanding is that, he moved over there and lived for a long time, married a woman, and the woman's, I think, father or maybe grandfather was an Aikido master. And as a result of that, Steven Seagal studied under him and became a, like 3rd degree Dan black, I don't know what it is, black belt something in Aikido, and then actually ended up running the dojo there in Japan for years and was the first Caucasian sort of Westerner to run an Aikido dojo in Japan, which is pretty awesome, actually, despite him being an asshole.
It is pretty awesome. And he must be, fairly intelligent man to speak. He speaks a couple different languages from what I understand, possibly Russian as well. Although he's claimed to speak Italian on Italian television, and there are videos of him out there where he clearly does not speak or understand Italian. So that may have been part of his character.
Yeah.
All right. I think I got maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
All right. Give it to me.
All right. So, true or false, despite living in Japan, Steven Seagal was born in America.
He was born in Lansing, Michigan. What?
That's correct. Lansing, Michigan. I lived there for several years myself. His father was his parents were, I think, generally blue collar. His father was a teacher. His mother worked for I want to say it was a pharmaceutical company, something like that. But he did grow up in Lansing, Michigan.
I just want to bring this back again. This is weird, the weird echoing of Burt Reynolds, because we found out that Burt Reynolds was also born in Lansing, Michigan, which is really strange.
Supposedly so.
So now we've got both of these guys have this Lansing, Michigan link and this weird, sordid, ethnical background of what are they actually. They claim things, but also guys who clearly played characters. Right? We talked about how Burt Reynolds kind of created the character of Burt Reynolds. Well, it seems like Steven Seagal did the same thing.
Right. So 2 more quick questions.
Okay.
Let's see. How about this? True or false? I mentioned he's had 4 wives. One of which was Kelly LeBrock. She was his most well-known wife.
Okay.
Probably remember her from some 80s movies.
I remember the name. Remind me.
I want to say, wasn't she in Top Gun?
Could be.
I believe
I
so.
I can look her up in a minute.
Okay, so true or false? He has 5 children.
I know he has a bunch of kids. I don't know the exact number. I'm going to say true.
He has 7. Okay.
That was a Brad question.
Yeah. And last but not least, true or false? Steven Seagal has recently been accused of multiple I don't know what the word I'm searching for.
Sexual harassment.
Yes. He has been accused of during the Me Too movement lately, multiple accounts of sexual misconduct in and off the set with partners he's worked with, secretaries he's had, actresses.
Everyone.
Apparently the list is pretty long.
Yes. This is definitely true. I know this. Yeah. Kelly LeBrock, by the way, is Lisa from Weird Science. She's in Hard to Kill. That's probably where they met, which was a film came shortly after this one. Wrong Accused. She's an 80s. You're right, 80s actress. She did, but probably Weird Science is what she's most known for. But yeah, those were good questions. Now I did some research about not specifically. Well, actually, I should say this before I even get into the film. One of the reasons that got me on the Seagal kick was this weird, like, kind of rivalry / I don't even know what it is between him and Jean-Claude Van Damme, which we've mentioned before, or at least I have.
Right.
You'll have to post a link. I put it on our Facebook webpage, but when we put this podcast up, you're gonna have to put the link up of the Arsenio Hall interview with Steven Seagal from the 90s, where he's asking him, because he obviously, as we've covered, Steven Seagal was a very prolific martial arts expert in Aikido, that particular type of martial arts, which we'll come back to. So Arsenio Hall was asking about some of the other guys in Hollywood, and Steven Seagal and his what becomes his typical assholery just like dismisses everyone and kind of like calls out Van Damme as a joke. So there was sort of this like weird rivalry between them, and that's what kind of got me on the Seagal kick and made me start looking into more about him. Sounds like everything you said in terms of not only the sexual harassment and things, questionable past, the involvement with the mob, but yeah, the dude was just an asshole. So I'm going to share a couple humorous anecdotes that I came across on my sort of rabbit hole run of the Steven Seagal search on YouTube and in Wikipedia and IMDb. So one that I found very interesting, Sean Connery, in an interview, was talking about how Steven Seagal, I guess, had been brought on set. I don't know what the film was. It may have been one of the Bond films, but some kind of action film. Now, Sean Connery actually had a black belt in karate. I think it was kind of like a honorary black belt. Like, I think over years of doing movies, he trained. But he says that they had Seagal on set. This is probably before Seagal was a leading man. He would do some stunt stuff, and they would bring him on to, like, basically be an expert.
A fight choreographer.
Yeah, and a consultant. And he actually broke Sean Connery's wrist. Because he was so intense and such an asshole, basically, is sort of the vibe that Sean Connery actually tells. Yeah, he's like, Steven Seagal, in Sean Connery accent. He's like, he broke my wrist. Yeah, I can't do a Sean Connery accent right now, but he's like, oh, Seagal. He talks about this in his interview. So he apparently was super intense on set or in person, and that actually came up in the making of this film, when Seagal, now, do you know about the backstory of the making of this film and why Seagal was selected? Did you read any of that?
I don't. I had to sort of think that watching it with all this stuff about, he was special forces and he was working with CIA, but then he just became a street level cop. I sort of felt like, and he was speaking different languages, Seagal maybe wanted people to think that was really who he was, like as a person. That's the feeling I got.
You're kind of on the right track. So let me give you some backstory of this, because I think it's very interesting, and this will correlate to some of the stuff that we found with Seagal and his mystery. So yes, he did study Aikido in Japan under an Aikido master. He was an Aikido master himself. He did move back to the United States in Los Angeles area, and he actually opened dojos in Los Angeles to teach Aikido. I think he may have brought his family with him because he wanted to bring this type of martial arts to the United States, which was not widely popular at all. Okay. And apparently, at least from what I'm understanding, is it wasn't really going well. Like, he wasn't really making a lot of money. It wasn't very successful. But he did have a student. I'm just pulling up his name here. Let's see here. Who worked with him? Michael Ovitz, who studied Aikido under Seagal. And Michael Ovitz was an agent in Hollywood. And he believed, I'm reading it right off IMDb, he believed that he could make anyone a movie star. That was his thing. He's like, if you make me your agent, you come into my hands, I can make anyone a movie star. That's how this guy sold himself. And so here he had Seagal, his sensei or Aikido master he was learning with. He's like, I can put you in a movie and make you a star. And that was the whole thing that he wanted to do. So Steven Seagal's like, okay, cool, let's do it. So they ended up, I guess this guy, Michael Ovitz, had pull in Hollywood, deciding to do this movie. Now, the way they went about this is they actually pulled a bunch of scripts from Warner Brothers. I think it was Warner Brothers. I can't remember. But they were actually a bunch of discarded scripts that were designed or written originally for Clint Eastwood vehicles.
Interesting.
So that's going to kind of make sense if you watch this movie, because if you think of Clint Eastwood in the like 80s and 90s, he was doing like the Dirty Harry films.
Dirty Harry, sure.
So people were submitting all these different scripts to get like Clint Eastwood to be the next Dirty Harry movie, because they were all just kind of like generic cop crime action films, right?
Yep.
And then you just put Clint Eastwood in it, and you just set it wherever I think it was San Francisco or something like that. So they had all these scripts, so they pulled one, and that was this one, Above the Law. They changed the name of it, and then it was actually Steven Seagal who said, I don't want it to take place in San Francisco. Let's make it Chicago. Let's make it like a kind of a Midwestern kind of gritty, blue collar crime drama, which maybe that gets back to your whole thing of his whole kind of creating an image or a character and being an Italian, even though he wasn't apparently Italian. So like, all right, no problem. But he also wanted to incorporate his quote unquote biography.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's questions of how much of this is true and how much of this is just fabricated. But when you watch the film, there's a very clear intro to the film that you can totally tell was shoehorned in to the original script, which is basically this backstory of him going over to Japan, studying martial arts, becoming a martial arts, which is basically his story. And there's all these photos of him. All those photos were actually real photos from his childhood.
Well, you could tell they were probably him, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So he kind of brought this sort of biographical, sort of personal element into this story, and then from there, after that, you could tell there's sort of a sharp turn where it just goes into what you can see would be
a cop movie.
Yeah, cop movie. There's the little vignette piece of him in the Vietnam War, right, where he's like special forces, and then he tries to stop the bad guy from using too much force on the Vietnamese, whatever, to get intel, and that sort of starts as bad blood for the character that ends up coming back later as a villain. But the other thing too was Steven Seagal was a big fan of the film Code of Silence, which is a Chuck Norris film that had come out previously. And
same director.
Yeah, well, Chuck Norris, as you know, is a famed martial artist himself. Right. So Seagal, I think, probably had some respect for Chuck Norris, which says something, because he doesn't seem to have a respect for anyone other than himself. But at least early in his life, he did. And so he actually brought in, like you said, the same director specifically for the reason that he liked Code of Silence. He's like, well, I want that guy who did Code of Silence. And the guy who plays the villain, I'm going to look him up right now. I can't remember his name. His name is Henry Silva, is also the villain in Code of Silence. Okay.
Oh, I didn't make that connection.
That's where this all comes from. Okay, so it was very intentional. There's a lot of intentionality in this whole film. They brought in Pam Grier. She plays his partner. I actually enjoyed her in the film. And I read two interesting things about this. One, Steven Seagal said of all these films he did, his favorite one was this film, and the character he most identified with was Nico Toscani. That makes sense in lieu of everything I just told you, where he basically kind of created this backstory that was autobiographical of his own life. But interestingly, Pam Grier, when asked what the favorite role she ever did, she said it was her role in this film as the character Dolores Jackson.
Wow.
And the reason for that is because she actually said she got to act. And if you know Pam Grier and her history, she was known for all the black exploitation films, like Coffee and what was some of the other ones she was in? She was in
Foxy Brown? I can't remember.
Well, yeah, Tarantino did bring her back. She was the main character of Foxy Brown, but she was known as being sort of the sort of pinnacle of the sort of exploitation films. So she was really more of a sex symbol and a sex object. So she really, in this film, she's a little not old. She's a little bit older. She still looks good. I mean, I think she's probably like early 50s. But she got to actually just play like a character part, and she actually enjoyed being cast for that reason, which I thought was really cool, and I thought she was good in it. But getting back to Seagal, another fun story I read on the internet, and then we'll get into the film, or unless you have more you want, is they talked about his appearance on Saturday Night Live. Did you know about this?
No.
So apparently after, I think it was the Under Siege movies, which I do want to at some point in time do Under Siege 1 and 2 because they are classics in their own right.
Sure.
Those were his big, like, kind of like mainstream blockbuster films. And that was like the real push to push Steven Seagal into the mainstream. Because after those, he may have done maybe, like he was in Executive Decision with Kurt Russell, but only like part of the film. And that I'm wondering if it was so difficult to work with. But then after that, he pretty much goes straight to video. It's all straight to video films, and the vast majority of his films, after like the mid 90s is straight. Go ahead.
I do have something to say about that came out during the court cases that he was involved with the mobsters. Was they claimed that, or his old partner, when they had a falling out, claimed that he owed a bunch of money because they had set up a multi-picture deal, and he basically pulled out of them because if you didn't know, Steven Seagal, or at least he was, he probably still is, a Buddhist, and he was receiving advice from the monks that his movies were too violent and things like that, and so under their tutelage, he decided to basically stop doing the movies that, were making him lots of money. Now that's the story. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was, brought up in the court cases.
It's interesting. Yeah. And he, I guess, has, he's a big quote unquote, interesting when we get to his social political values. A big supporter of the Dalai Lama and things, sort of some of the Eastern religions, but also an avid supporter of Vladimir Putin, and actually a current like American-Russian liaison of some kind. He I don't know, it's very strange.
He actually owns or is a part owner of a Russian gun company.
Yeah, this guy's interesting, an interesting dude, for sure, and a lot of weird stuff about him. But anyways, this film was his first film, and again, he got in the door because this guy who was a student said he could make anyone an action star. This is Seagal also not only probably one of his best films, but certainly at his leanest. Here's the thing I've noticed: we talked like the JCVD like pre-coked up John Claude versus coked up John Claude. We've talked about the pre-mustachioed Burt Reynolds versus the post-mustachioed Burt Reynolds. Here's the thing about Seagal. You can like easily quantify or measure the quality of the film based off the
size of the Seagal.
Well, yeah, his waist size and his hairline.
Oh yeah.
Because here's the other thing too, and also the length of his hair. It's a trifecta. It's waistline, hairline, length of hair. As he goes more bald, he just like grows his hair out longer, and his waist gets bigger, and he just keeps getting kind of chubbier and fatter. And if you've seen him now, it's just horrendous to see what this man looks like. But he actually at this early age, I feel like this is him physically at his best. He wasn't a specimen like we had in many of the 80s films. He was very lean. He's also a very tall guy. I think he's like 6'4" or something like that. He's very tall.
Could be.
But some other fun facts about this film. When they brought him in to do a sort of when the film company, and again I want to say Warner Brothers, that might
it was Warner Brothers.
Okay.
I believe you're right about that.
So when they brought him in to see, when this guy Michael Orvitz, whatever his name is, said, "Hey, you got to put this guy in a film," they brought him in. He terrified the people that were like watching him because he was so intense. Didn't notice it was all staged. So this tells me something about him. The people he brought in to do a martial arts kind of exposition and show how skilled he was, but he had planned it all ahead of time with his students. He brought in were actually his students. So he also seems like he has a certain I don't know, Hollywood showmanship about him all along, where he sort of
flair for the dramatic.
Yeah, he staged all the stuff. But the other thing too about this that's interesting is apparently he and the guy who played the villain, I just said it a minute ago. I'll pull it up again. They went on a ride along with some real Chicago cops in order to kind of get in the whatever mood of this film. And the cops reported that the people that they interacted with on the streets were more terrified of Seagal than they were of them because he was so intense. He actually got his nose broken in this film in the final scene, and he just iced it and came back and filmed and closed out the film, which tells me that. So apparently he was not only super intense in terms of his violent actions against others, but he let people do that to him in return, which I guess is counts for something. I mean if he's letting the guy break his nose in the scene to get it realistic, tells me that he has a certain intensity. The Henry Silva, I couldn't remember his name. Him and Seagal went in a row. So that was another thing that happened in this film, is that final scene he actually gets his nose broken. He just iced it overnight and came back. They didn't think they were going to be able to shoot, but he did. But so weird dude for sure. A lot of suspicious, strange things surrounding him. But I will say this. It's a little obvious when you watch the film, but and I'll just see if you kind of caught up on this. Well, actually, let me ask you this question first. What did you think of the fight scenes in this film?
Well, I don't know a lot about Aikido, but I know we've talked about it in the past where it tends to be more of a defensive martial arts. And you could see, those scenes looked the most natural, where he's just like flipping guys and flipping guys and flipping guys. And the rest of it, he's running around shooting, which was much less convincing. Like I said, he totally runs like a girl.
Yes.
And, I felt like there really was a lot less martial arts than I expected in the movie.
I thought there were some pretty decent scenes of him. I mean, they're obviously very staged, of him like going into like places and using his Aikido skills. He did choreograph a lot of this. He helped write the script, based off the previous script that they already had in place. He helped produce it, so he's very involved. But he also chose all the weapons that were used, which seemed very obvious to me because, it was like people wouldn't have a gun somehow, or their gun wouldn't work, and then all of a sudden they'd pull out like a sword or a knife, and it gave him an opportunity to like use Aikido very clearly, like, I can disarm this guy with a knife or disarm this guy with a sword. But I did think, and this is one of the reasons why I kind of like this movie, I did feel like it did provide a platform for him to show off Aikido, and he clearly seemed very skilled at disarming. Well, he is. We know he's skilled, but he got to show off the skills of disarming people with weapons, but not only doing a lot of like joint locks. Where I don't know if you caught that. I didn't catch it till after watching it the second time, but a lot of like just like grabbing people's wrists and twisting them and using their joints against them, which is I guess a big part of Aikido and a very effective sort of form of martial arts. I also felt like it was maybe a little bit more realistic than something that we would normally see, because you actually had a guy who actually was a skilled professional, and that was nice. It was kind of weird that it was juxtaposed with him being like a Chicago street cop.
Right.
And once I read that, it was originally like supposed to be a vehicle for Clint Eastwood as a cop movie, it made sense, because it was sort of like, hey, we've got this guy who's a skilled Aikido martial artist. We want to put him in a film. Most films are kind of just like mobster cop films. How do we bring these two together? Well, let's just shoehorn this backstory in so we can have a cop who also does all this like kind of cool Aikido stuff, but also is like doing a weird cop drama story. So I don't know.
So yeah, I definitely agree with all the things that you said, but for me, I guess those scenes felt a little too out of place at times for me, where I'm just like, okay, the whole cop story and he's like, he's basically taking down like the CIA and stuff too in this movie.
Yeah.
Just seems so far-fetched.
Yeah.
Like they were trying to take it and make it something much grander instead of just keeping it like, if they had just played it a little bit more straight and a little bit less almost exploitation-y, it probably would have made for a better movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess when you watch like Van Damme, some of his early movies, most of them are like tournament or fighting movies. Right? Where it's like, it just basically, the plot creates a reason for him to be in a fighting tournament.
Sure.
Versus this, where it was trying to be like an actual, maybe legit movie with some story and just, weaving in some of those things. And I mean, it was fine, I guess. Here's the good thing about Above the Law. This is probably number one. Pam Grier was great. I don't disagree with that. She was excellent. But more importantly, you're wearing a samurai cop tank, which I'm guessing was intentional.
Yes.
Because if we didn't have Above the Law, we certainly would not have Samurai Cop.
No, for sure. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, Seagal set a new standard for the action genre, and he kind of was the pinnacle in some ways of that, as a sort of white martial artist doing these sort of white martial arts asshole doing films, and successfully.
It's like he was trying to merge together like the mobster films, like Goodfellas, with the 80s martial arts films.
No, and I think that's exactly.
I guess you could say for the most part he was successful at doing that, despite whether or not he was the right person for it. But I just, aside from like his personal issues outside of these movies, I still just don't like him as a character.
No.
Did
I ever come back to the Saturday Night Live thing? I didn't.
No, we didn't.
Because that's where I was going with this. According to like Lorne Michaels and many of the cast members, like David Spade, who was a longtime member of Saturday Night Live, Steven Seagal was the worst host they ever had. They said he was just an asshole. Like, he just was an asshole to everyone. He didn't think anything was funny. Anything that made him look unmanly or like questioned his whatever, he like dismissed, to the point where like the people didn't even want to work with him. It was just a shitty show, and they didn't even care because a guy was such a dick. And they've actually been open about, no, that was like the worst show ever. So that just gets back to his ego and his sort of, I don't know, mindset, and he's just being very difficult to work with. I feel like, had he been a person who was maybe a little bit more, I don't know, reasonable, maybe his career would have gone a different route. But he just wasn't that type of guy. And that was, I feel like that's why this film to me is his best film, because at this point in time, he's just doing this for shits and giggles. It's this guy's like, hey, I can make you an action star. It's like, all right, well, I don't know. Like, we have this script. It doesn't really fit, but let's shoehorn in some stuff about Kung Fu, or not Kung Fu, Aikido, truthfully. I'll be a martial artist. I'll be a cop. Yeah, they're not really related, but whatever. It's the 80s. Who cares? And we'll make this movie. And people liked it because it's not a bad film. It's okay.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, and so then people like, and again, I said from a martial arts standpoint, he was obviously very, very adept. So people are like, oh, this guy's kind of cool. He did kind of. Here's the thing, I feel like he like we've talked about, he's clearly an asshole in real life. He has kind of an asshole persona on screen, but it kind of works. He has a bit of a kind of the cockiness, I feel like, on screen kind of works. And he's not strangely, he's not a bad actor. But I don't feel like he's acting. I feel like he's just being an asshole. Yeah. And that was the character. Like, Nick was just kind of an asshole. And he just thought he was like the best, most awesome thing ever. That's the character. And I feel like that's how he is in real life.
It's interesting that you said they used a Clint Eastwood vehicle, because I feel like anytime I see him in a movie, it's a guy just doing like his best Clint Eastwood impersonation. Like, just the squinty eyes and everything. And, oh, you're getting a call. Yeah, this is my impersonation of Steven Seagal on the phone. Hey, it's me. I'm Steven Seagal. I'm so cool, I hold my phone upside down. Yeah, so I don't even get it. It's ridiculous. That was my favorite scene in the whole movie, though, was at the phone booth where he is holding his belt loop in one hand and holding the telephone like upside down, because he's so cool out on the street in his tank top and his jeans, which is apparently his official cop uniform in this movie. I also really just hate his hair in general. He's got like the slick back hair from the front going back and the sides, but then he's got like sort of this mini mullet with the curls, like these greasy curls hanging out of the back. So, just the whole character that that he's created, I'm just not down with it at all. I know we'll probably do some more Steven Seagal movies in the future, because there are some other classics. There are some other Steven Seagal movies out there that are probably worth covering. And just me thinking about the fact that this is maybe his best one only makes like the future ones I know will probably go over less enticing. But I feel like we'd be doing our listeners and watchers a disservice if at some point we didn't at least cover the Under Siege movies, because I know there's a lot of people out there who like Steven Seagal or liked that pseudo Clint Eastwood martial arts character that he created. But I don't really know what else to say about it at this point.
Did you like the film? Like, on a scale of like 1 to 10, what would you give this film?
I would give it a 4 or a 5.
I feel like that's valid.
I was very like, it's fine. It was watchable. Not to the point where I ever felt like, man, I'm so engrossed in this, I want to see what happens. But the fight scenes were interesting enough to keep me watching. Personally, I found him just sort of hilarious throughout the whole movie as a character, like I mentioned, with the upside down phone and the slicked hair and the curls. And I just don't like him, if I haven't said that enough. And so it wasn't a painful movie to watch, but it wasn't something that I, would probably revisit very often.
There you go. Yeah, that's valid. I guess we should briefly just say about the movie. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but just real quick, kind of in a I don't know, speed round. The film is basically Steven Seagal. He's a martial arts expert, quote unquote. I should say Nico Toscani. He gets recruited into the Secret Service. He's sent over to Vietnam. He gets involved in a weird debacle with some mysterious, suspicious, unknown part of the Secret Service who's basically trying to seek intel. They're being abusive and they're doing all kinds of manipulative, sort of like torture treatments. He tries to get involved. He disappears. As a result, that he leaves the special ops or whatever. It just becomes a street cop or a narcotics office, Chicago. There's a weird uprising in narcotics. I guess this film took place when there was kind of like the I guess heroin and cocaine boom in Chicago in the 80s. So that's kind of correlating with that. So you think it's going to be like a drug film. You think it's, like I said, like an Untouchables,
right.
but instead of being alcohol, it's drugs, which is basically what these films are. So Chicago, it's Italians, it's mob. Instead of running booze and being about prohibition, it's about the drug industry. But what's weird is then it takes this weird turn, which is what you brought up, which is true, which is it tries to be more than it is, and then it's like, oh wait, they're not smuggling drugs, they're smuggling C4, right. And then it becomes this like weird turn of like, why are they smuggling C4? And then you find out that it's like the government's involved, and they're basically trying to murder a guy who's going to be like the governor. He's like a political figure in the Chicago area, and the reason they're going to murder him is because he doesn't support whatever, I don't know, capitalistic endeavor they want to be involved with somewhere overseas, and so they're going to plant this bomb in this church. It allows for this weird sort of Italian Catholic understory where Nico Toscani's this devout, quote unquote devout Catholic. And he therefore has a connection at the local church where they're like hiding like immigrants under the basement. And go ahead.
Yeah, and we didn't mention who else is in this movie with him. Sharon Stone.
Yeah,
Sharon Stone plays his wife.
Yeah, weird. There's actually a pretty solid cast in this film, considering it was his first film. It was a pretty, I wouldn't say it was a low budget B film for a first film. This was kind of a mid-level action film. They did bring in, now granted, Sharon Stone wasn't the name she was post Basic Instinct, but I mean, she'd done stuff. So I mean, there's some solid actors in this film. But yeah, there's this weird like kind of Catholic priest understory, and there's this like weird like there's immigrants hiding in the basement, and they're trying to like blow up the church. And the final scene is really strange, where he like tracks them down, and they're like beating him up. And he pretends like he's injured, and then he like gets up and Aikidos them, and he like snaps the guy's arm and then like snaps his neck.
Yeah.
That stood out to me for some reason. But that's basically the story. It ends up being this like weird conspiracy story of like, it's not just about like this guy Henry Silva or whatever, who's like kind of the drug runner, kind of the stereotypical sort of criminal drug crime boss. He's actually working with the government, and it loops it back to, of course, our start, which is Nico Toscani's involvement with the special service, quote unquote CIA or whoever they are, all the way back to Vietnam. Because wow, what are the odds? The guy who is the person he interacted with 20 years ago is the same guy, I don't know, behind the scenes trying to this whatever government official. I can't remember if it was a governor or a senator or something.
I want to think it was a senator. I want to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fine. What did you like the movie?
Well, like I said, I agree with you. I don't like Steven Seagal either. I think he's an asshole. So I wanted to be the most charitable. I feel like it's a steady decline after this. I feel like the first 4 or 5 movies he does aren't bad, but they're not great, but they're okay. I like the Under Siege movies. I feel like they're his, like I said, his big kind of like Moneyball films. They bring in people like some big name actors who the first one has several people in it. I can't remember. Tommy Lee Jones is in there, but you'll see some familiar faces in those ones. But they're pretty campy. They're kind of like Speed, but instead of being on a bus, they're on either like a ship or a train.
A boat. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of being Keanu Reeves, who you grow to love and actually enjoy. Surprisingly, it's Steven Seagal who are like, oh, I just dislike him. So,
Yeah.
But we'll do those films as well. But like I said, I picked these because I wanted to do a Seagal film. I feel like this was the most charitable one to offer. I feel like this is totes the line between an action film and kind of a exploitation film.
Yeah.
It's right on that edge. And I actually did think the martial arts aspect of it was, even though very clearly shoehorned in, clearly not part of the original script, he was pretty good on screen with that, in my opinion.
That's fair. So do you want to tell, I think this pretty much wraps it up. Do you want to tell our plans for the next episode? We have a special guest joining us.
Yeah, we're going to have another couple episodes of BAMB with Friend. We're going to have a guest host, guest star, whatever you want to call it. These were his picks. We're actually going to do two. He picked two, so we're gonna kind of marathon it, and we'll have a couple episodes coming out to you. The first one we're gonna do is Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, which will give us an opportunity to talk about the Fast and Furious franchise kind of as a whole, but we'll obviously sort of I don't know, we'll try to focus it on that particular film, Tokyo Drift, which is the third in the series. And then the plan is to do a follow-up podcast on Blade Trinity, which will give us an opportunity to do the Blade series, but also the third in that trilogy as well. I'm more excited about Blade stuff because I'm a big comic guy, Marvel Comics, and of course Blade is from the old Marvel comic book Tomb of Dracula, which is a comic I enjoy. So,
and it's a fun movie. It's not great. I actually like Tokyo Drift, even though it's sort of the odd one out of the movies. So I'm looking forward to that. So we will be back with those shortly.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully you learned some informative and fun things about Mr. Steven Seagal. I know that I did just looking things up on the internet. What an interesting character. But it's been another fun episode. Thanks for listening or watching if you watch us on YouTube. And stay tuned. We will be back. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.